Thank you. Our workshop facilitator this morning believes that many Toastmasters leave their clubs because of the fear caused by evaluations. Not receiving them, giving them. For most of his 35 years in Toastmasters, his primary focus has been on providing and helping others provide effective evaluations. He's been recognized for his skill as the only 3-time winner of the District 30 evaluation contest and a presenter of evaluation workshops like the one we will be hearing today at many district conferences and TLIs. Outside of Toastmasters, he uses his speaking and evaluation skills as the sales training and enablement specialist for Server Worldwide, the largest relocation company in the world. To help us learn how to create and deliver effective evaluations, please put your hands together and give a big virtual behind the scenes welcome to Stan Piskorski. Take it away, Stan.
Thank you so much, Mr. Toastmaster. You need to give me just a moment to get my shared screen set up because I have to do some special stuff in relation to setting up the chat function. Calvin, I'm going to ask you to watch the chat window. I'm having some challenges on that. So I'm not able to see the folks who are participating. I would like to invite anyone who has a question, please just speak out and ask the question because I think it's an important thing for us to do. And I'm also going to have a little bit of participation that I'm going to ask you to do. So feel free to join in on the participation. You know, you just heard from that Calvin said I've been a Toastmaster for 35 years. And in 35 years, I have attended a lot of Toastmaster meetings. And what I find is 3 things. Usually when I sit and when I watch a Toastmaster meeting, the speeches are usually well done. They've been prepared. People are ready to deliver the speeches. Table topics are almost always enjoyable, and many of the people who are in the club participate, as do guests. But the weakest part of the meeting is almost always the evaluation portion. So we're going to look today at how to improve the quality of the evaluation portion of the meeting. We're going to look at 3 things today: why evaluations matter, how to deliver effective evaluations, and what to do to improve your evaluations. To start, I'd like to ask a question, and please unmute and yell out the responses. Why do you think people join Toastmasters? Think about your own experiences and think about the people that you know.
Speak more confidently.
Speak more confidently. Great. What else?
They want to grow.
They want to grow. Great. What else?
To be a better leader.
Be a better leader. Good. What else?
Have better skills.
Be able to communicate effectively.
Okay. What else?
Interpersonal relationships.
Say that last one about relationships again.
Interpersonal relationships.
Interpersonal relationships. Good. What else?
Connect to other learners who share the same value and goal to learn to improve communication skills.
Okay. Anything else?
Yes, Bonnie wrote in the chat to build confidence to get past the interview process.
Okay, so building confidence. Great. Anything else?
To get motivated.
To say again?
To get motivated.
You get motivated. Great. So as I listen to your answers, they're pretty similar to the answers that I've found over time is a number of things that are common to why people join Toastmasters. Here's my list. And the one that you didn't mention is issues with a specific communication concern, either speech pathology like stuttering. I've known a number of people who have overcome their stuttering and other kinds of speech issues by simply practicing, and also practicing English as a second language, especially things like accents and subject-verb agreements and usage challenges. You'll notice one thing about almost all of the items on this list. Excuse me. Almost all of the items on this list, in order to be improved, require effective feedback. Now, if you think about our founder, Ralph Schmedley, and I got to tell you, every time I see the word Ralph Schmedley, I think it's some cartoon character because it's such an unusual name. Ralph Schmedley was quoted as saying, "No Toastmasters Club is fulfilling its obligation to its members unless it brings them the maximum in training in the art of constructive criticism." You know, I looked at that definition for a long time, and I had a bit of a problem with the words that he chose. And the specific word has to do with the word criticism. So I looked it up because, you know, all words have both connotations and denotations. Denotations is the actual definition, and connotation is how people interpret that. So I figured maybe I was being overly sensitive to the connotation of criticism. But sure enough, as I looked it up, I discovered that the connotation and the denotation are about the same. If you'll notice, almost all of these definitions have something to do with passing judgment. And I don't know about you, but I don't like to be judged when I'm trying to learn things.
Agreed.
But you know, some people would say, well, wait a minute, we don't really do criticism, we do evaluation. So I said, okay, let's look up the definition of evaluation. Son of a gun, I saw that it also has to do with judging or determining value. So I decided I was going to rethink the term of Toastmasters evaluation and define it as two specific things. To me, Toastmaster evaluation is a combination of feedback and coaching. Now, that requires us to go dig deeper into both of those terms. So what I mean by feedback is this definition: a response from the receiver that informs the sender how the communication is being received. Let's take that into our clubs. From the receiver, the audience member, the club member, informs the sender, the speaker, how the communication, the speech, is being received. And by received, I mean seen, heard, and felt. If that's the definition of feedback, what then is the definition of coaching? Well, to me, coaching is two things. One thing is instructing or training. And when you instruct and train, you talk about what to do, how to do it, and most importantly, why to do it. On top of that, since behavior change, which is what instructing and training is about, takes time and can be discouraging, it's important for the coach also to provide encouragement to improve. So let's think about this role of coaching and speaking in our clubs. When we look at the job of the speaker's job is actually pretty simple. It's to communicate effectively with every member of the audience. Now that's a pretty big chore, communicating with every member of the audience, because I'm sure if I were looking at your faces right now, some of you are enthralled by this and some of you have checked out a little bit already. However, the evaluator, instead of just having one job, has three jobs. The first job is to inform the speaker how he or she has communicated either effectively or ineffectively. Then also to provide recommendations And that includes how to change ineffective behaviors, but more importantly, how to maintain effective behaviors. And that's why criticism is such a bad term, because it doesn't suggest that you want to maintain effective behaviors, and also to encourage continuous efforts. So why do we do this in Toastmasters anyway? Why do we do feedback and coaching? Well, there's something, you all have heard the term, what's in it for me? I hope you've all heard the term, what's in it for me? So let's take a look at what's in it for the number of individuals in the club. What's in it for the speaker? Well, many people have heard the term practice makes perfect, but it's not actually true. Practice makes permanent. If you practice poorly, you'll be better at performing poorly. What is true is that perfect practice makes perfect. Now, in order to have perfect practice, you need to be able to have performance, and performance requires feedback. After all, speaking is a performance art. We don't see ourselves in the moment delivering the speech. We have to have others watch us. And in the days of recording like we can today, so easily, especially on Zoom meetings, even ourselves as the person giving feedback to us is still watching that performance and then giving feedback afterwards. And as I said, improvement requires encouragement. If change was easy, I'd be thin. And let me assure you, I am not thin. So what's in it for the evaluator? Well, there's kind of an interesting thing about the evaluator, because the evaluator, by giving feedback, learns to become both a better speaker and a better speech writer. I think this quote really helps us understand why the evaluator becomes a better speaker and speech writer. If you want to learn something, you read about it. And I read about things all the time. But if you want to understand it, you have to process that information. And it helps to process it by writing about it. But if you really want to master some skills, teach them. So now we know about the speaker and the evaluator, but there are other people that are involved in the process. And that is what happens to the observer, the club members. Well, by watching the speaker and the feedback that is given by the evaluator, everyone who is there becomes a better speaker, a better speech writer, and a better coach. Now, oftentimes in the spring, we're going to be having the evaluation contest. And I often hear people say, oh yeah, I'm going to participate in the evaluation contest because it doesn't require any preparation. Let me tell you, that is a bad way to look at it. If you really want to be a good evaluator, the biggest mistake you can make is being unprepared to provide feedback and coaching, because good coaching requires preparation. Think about when you hear what athletic coaches do between games. They look at the previous performance, the game films, if you will, and they plan for the next game. Well, at Toastmasters, we really have two kinds of feedback and preparation coaching we can do. The first kind we can do is specific. We can look at the purpose of the project and, importantly, what some of the specific goals of the speaker are. We're not going to cover looking at the specific preparation. We're going to look at more general preparation. And by becoming knowledgeable about the evaluation process and building a recommendation repertoire, you will become better prepared to be an effective evaluator. So let's take a look at that general preparation. What is the evaluation speech? The evaluation speech has a topic, and the topic is the speech that has just been observed. The format for that speech is a 2 to 3 minute structured presentation that is to both the speaker and the audience. And I believe it should be delivered in first person. Now, what I mean by that is it's from my perspective as the observer. I know there are some cultures in the world where giving specific feedback and correcting someone, if you will, can be perceived as something that would cause the receiver of that feedback to lose face. But if you're really going to do a good coaching job, you have to be willing to say, this is my perspective. And the reason it's important for it to be my perspective is because most of us, in fact, I think all of us, aren't able to read the minds of the people that are listening to the presentation that they are hearing and seeing. So how many of you have ever been to a movie and said, oh my, that was a really wonderful movie, and you talked to a friend who said, really, I thought that was the dumbest movie I'd ever seen? You each have a different perspective. And so when you're watching a speech, you can have some things that you thought were particularly effective, but somebody sitting right next to you thought was ineffective. And that's why you have to speak in the first person. The focus of the speech, the focus of the evaluation presentation is to work on performance improvement. Either the same speech to be delivered again, but not all speeches that we hear in Toastmasters are going to be delivered again. So we're looking at what skills can be built for future speeches. Now, the feedback that you can give consists of three things: what you saw, what you heard, and what you felt. And in reality, you're actually answering three core feedback questions: what, why, and how. These are the things that the speaker wants to know. Well, let's dig a little bit deeper into what, why, and how. They want to know what was effective and what was ineffective. Now, you'll notice I don't use the term strengths or weaknesses, because communicating is about communicating effectively. Is something that you observed, did you find it to be effective in you receiving the communication? Or did you find it to be ineffective in communicating with you? So for example, if instead of looking at my camera, I was looking off like this, you might think that that was a pretty ineffective way for me to deliver a presentation, because you felt disconnected. And that's the second part of it. Why do you feel that it was either effective or ineffective? So for example, if I'm looking off like this, you could say, you know, I didn't feel like you were connecting with me because you were looking off somewhere besides into the camera. So that's the reason why it was effective or ineffective. Finally, we have to look at what suggestions we can make, how you could either use it more if it was effective, or what specifically you might want to have changed if it was ineffective. So now let's take a look at the actual structure of creating that speech. We know what it's all about. Let's look at how it's specifically created. I believe that the opening should follow the Toastmaster ritual. And to me, the Toastmaster ritual sounds something like this: Mr. General Evaluator or Madam General Evaluator, Mr. Toastmaster or Madam Toastmaster, or if you're in a contest, Mr. Contest Master or Madam Contest Masters. Then following that, fellow Toastmasters and guests, and I always like to say, and most importantly, the name of the speaker. The second part of the opening is really connecting with the speaker. Something that you can say that shows, you know what, I was really listening to your presentation. So for example, I heard a wonderful speech about a delicacy of a lionfish, which happens to be a poisonous fish. So when I heard that speech, I wanted to give feedback that said, I really appreciated your presentation about lionfish. I'm a diver and I know that they're extremely dangerous to be near. So I was fascinated to hear about how they could be eaten. So that would be a connection to the speaker. You're not giving feedback about whether that was good or bad, whether that was effective or ineffective. You're simply saying, I hear you. I connected with you. The next piece of it is the body. And the body consists of two different places, two different things. Mastery, things that someone did effectively. So I like to use the term mastery and growth opportunities. And we're going to talk about growth opportunities in a second. So anything that someone did that was effective showed that they had mastered that particular skill or that particular way of communicating. You know, speaking is a learned skill. None of us were born knowing how to speak. Everything we learned about speaking, we learned through growing over time. So anytime we have a skill that we don't know, it's simply a growth opportunity. I don't know how to do that yet. And so a growth opportunity is any behavior that was either less effective or I consider it completely ineffective. Most of the time, if you're giving feedback to an experienced speaker, you want to pick 2 or 3 in each one of these things. 2 or 3 things where the behaviors were effective, and 2 or 3 things where the behaviors were ineffective. So how do you give that feedback? Well, the easy part is kind of picking out what the behavior was. The hard part is doing the feedback on why it was effective or ineffective and what you would suggest. And I have a 3-step model that I strongly recommend for giving feedback. And I call it ORS. So what you're doing is you're giving feedback and coaching. The first part is the observation, which is the feedback, which is part of feedback. The second one is your reaction. So remember when I said when I looked off to the side, you didn't feel like I was connecting with you? That would be your reaction. And the suggestion is the actual coaching, what to do and how to do it. So let's take a look at what that would look like. Here's an example of here are some things that you are part of observation. What you saw and what you heard. Remember, you can only speak for yourself. So what you can't do is say something like, oh, we all thought all your jokes were very funny. But you can say something like, you know, when you told that joke, I heard a lot of laughter from the audience. So it's clear that that many of us felt you were funny. So you've observed others and can speak from the group in that perspective. Here's some examples of how you might start sentences about observation. When you did blah, 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 I noticed such and such. I saw that you blank, blank, blank. I heard you say, or when you said. Now, in order for you to do that, you have to be as specific as possible. And we're going to talk later on about how to be as specific as possible. The second part that we want to look at after observation is the reaction. And the reaction is how you felt and why to you that action was either effective or ineffective and what emotion it might have triggered. So for example, there might be reasons that you have for a reaction. Perhaps you had a similar experience and could really relate to a specific thing. Or perhaps somebody said something that offended you because of an ethnic thing or a gender thing, or something about the geographic background. There are things you can say in New York that you would not say in Alabama. And you might have some specific sensitivity. So for example, we just heard about someone whose relative passed away. I heard the conversation earlier about that. So if you happen to be making a speech and you were making fun of, let's say, a funeral, and the evaluator is someone who just had lost someone, they might say, you know, that really didn't help me because I was very sensitive to that experience. It just happened to me. So here's what reaction might sound like. Again, these are the beginning of sentences. I was drawn in, I was lost, That's a particularly effective one when someone has a disorganized speech. I felt disconnected. You heard that example earlier. I almost felt like crying. Boy, when something really moves you, you might almost feel like crying. I'm an easy laugher, and so when I hear when someone tells me something in a speech that I find humorous, I would say something like, I laughed out loud, or the audience laughed, or I heard some chuckles. And again, you might say something like, I was offended because. Now, oftentimes we hear people say reactions that are way too general. Here are some examples of some bad examples of reactions that I would suggest avoiding. That was good, that was terrible, oh, that was excellent. Those are not words that are very helpful because they're not specific. So I strongly recommend trying to avoid reactions that sound like that. When we get to the third part, we're talking about specific suggestions, either actions that the speaker can make to become more effective and how to increase the use of those effective behaviors. Now, this is an area where a lot of people are a little bit afraid. They say things like, well, maybe, perhaps you might try. But be confident in your suggestions. Say things like, try this, explore this. It might work if. Don't be too timid about the suggestions you make. They're just suggestions and they're your opinion. Everyone is entitled to an opinion. If the speaker doesn't feel that that suggestion would work, that's okay. It's simply an idea. So how does that sound when it's all put together? Let's hear an example. Let's look at an example of coaching and feedback all put together with the OARS method. I noticed you were averting your eyes from the audience. As a result, I felt disconnected from you. One technique I've tried is to think of the room as individuals instead of a whole group, and to look at one person for a few seconds before looking at a different person. On your next speech, I recommend you try that technique. So, that's an example of how we can give feedback. Now, there are some things you can do to help those tips be even more powerful. If you can find a way that you can help the speaker remember what your tip is, then you might have a more effective tip. You might be able to model suggestions. So, for example, if you're in a live situation and you see someone going off to the side of the stage, you might physically put yourself in the center of the stage. Here on camera, I often see people that are looking at their camera kind of like this or like this. You know, I don't really want to see the inside of your nose or the top of your head. And so if I was watching that and seeing you on camera like this, I might gesture and say, when you look like this, you're disconnected. You might also be able to name your tips. I'll give you some examples. It's a little difficult to show on this kind of a screen, but one of my favorite names for a tip is the T-Rex. The T-Rex is when someone gestures with their elbows at their side and their hands are like this. And so you end up seeing them looking like their hands are held to the front of them, just like a T-Rex, which has small hands and, of course, big legs. You might also hear someone who speaks in spurts, so that when they're talking, you don't really get a whole sentence at a time. I call that a machine gun delivery because it's one that sounds to me like a machine gun, rat-a-tat, rat-a-tat-tat. When we're live and standing up and we put our hands in front of our private areas, if you will, that's the fig leaf. Sometimes we put our hands behind our back. I used to call that the reverse fig leaf but someone suggested something that I thought was much more vivid, and he calls it the handcuffs, which I really, really like. So I've been talking now for about 28 minutes. And what I would like to do is to give you a chance to practice this. I'd like you to think about a behavior that I've done that you've observed, your reaction to that behavior, and then to make a suggestion. So please unmute yourself and try this. Calvin, I'll ask you to monitor who, maybe I suggest putting your hand up and letting Calvin call on you.
Sharon.
I see how you sat in the middle of your screen and stared at the camera, maintaining audience eye contact the entire time. And I think I can work on doing that in future presentations as long as we're doing this virtual meetings. So that's a good positive thing that you've done, and I've noticed during your presentation.
So what was your reaction?
I felt connected to you.
Good. See, now that's the reaction. I felt. That's what the reaction is. So what kind of a suggestion would you make to me?
I would suggest that you continue to maintain eye contact with your audience by looking at the camera and staying centered within the camera frame. That's my suggestion.
That is a perfect example of how to do it. What you observed, your reaction, and in this case, you observed something that you thought was effective, and so you want me to continue doing that and not do something like this.
Exactly.
How about another one? That was great. Thank you so much.
Frank, I think you're unmuted now.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Frank, we still are not picking up your audio. We understand. We will move on. Rick, I heard you. Please give your feedback for Stan.
Unfortunately, I don't have any feedback. Stan, I don't see you very well, so I don't know what's happening on the screen. But for the next phase of participation, how do I raise my hand? What button is it? Reactions doesn't have a raised hand. There's a thumbs up. Is that what I use?
In this case, I was simply looking for you to put your hand up on the screen so that Calvin could see it.
Yeah, I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to do that. That's my question.
No, I'm saying a physical hand like this.
Oh.
Okay.
In front of the camera.
That's all that's necessary in this. If you want to learn how to raise your hand, it's in the participant guide. You need to put the participant screen up, and there's a line, there's a little space under there that says raise hand.
I see. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Just for clarification,
Calvin,
Stan, Rick has a visual impairment, so he generally does not have his camera on. What he's asking is how can he gesture when he wants to make a comment on the screen.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I don't believe, Rick, are you familiar with how to use the thumbs up?
The reaction numbers down at the
reactions?
Yeah, I asked about that. He thought that there's a hands up menu option in the participants button. So I'll work with that. But I could use the thumbs up too, is what you're saying?
Sure.
Yes, I would say for Rick, we'll use the thumbs up since he cannot do the hands up. So when Rick is ready to speak, we'll ask him to use the thumbs up. Is that okay, Mr. Toastmaster?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Oh, good point. Thank you, Antonia. If my camera's not on, it doesn't matter if I raise my hand. You'll never see it. Oops. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, Stan, I guess.
Can I have one more suggestion? Can I have one more attempt at doing this?
Josna.
Mr. Stan, I deliver evaluations at work also all the time. And I don't know what is the correct way of doing. And that's why I'm excited to be here and going through this workshop. And some of the points that you have said resonated with me. It's hard to give when we say constructive feedback, right? There is a thin line between being very specific about that feedback, and there is always that notion of maybe you are hurting someone's feelings about it. So today, I think the way you have said, keeping it specific, but also trying to put your observations, you as an observer, and some of those things resonated with me. Your connection with the audience is very good. And as Sharon said, I agree with her. You are able to go to one person at a time. That's why that eye contact is very good. I think that is something that you should continue to do.
Okay, so now listen to some of the things that you've been saying. You've given a lot of information, but it has not been specific. Pick one specific thing that you found effective.
What I found effective is the tips that you are going through, the structure of the evaluation that you are walking us through.
Great. Okay, so presenting the structure was effective to you. What was your reaction when you saw the structure?
It basically now gave me a way to put that structure next time I provide the evaluation, how I should go about structuring my evaluations in the future. So that helped me, because a lot of times, one thing I tell you, you said it was good, it was terrible. Some of that, we never say it was terrible, of course, but we always say, hey, your speech was great. We keep throwing those words, your speech was great. But what I have heard you say is, instead of using those words, be very specific about what is great. And today, I think that is great about your speech, that being very specific about how our evaluation should be in the future.
Stan, I think you're frozen now. Stan, can you hear us? Stan has just logged off. I guess he's going to come back in. So I will mention while he's getting back in that in the chat, there is a evaluation sessions note PDF, and you can use that to jot down notes while we're going through the workshop. Stan, are you back? You're muted. You're muted.
My apologies. My internet connection has been very iffy out here where I am, and I don't know why. I apologize for that happening. So who was it that was last giving me feedback, because I didn't hear all the details of it?
Josna.
It was me, Josna.
Hey, Josna, so what was the specific feedback? You said that one of the things you observed was there was a structure that was clear to you, right?
Yes.
And what
yes.
did that cause? What was your
that helped me to have that as my, I guess, framework next time I give an evaluation.
Great.
It helped me put together that. So
now, do you have a suggestion of either how I could apply that more, or what I need to change to make it easier for you to understand?
I like the way you are going through. If there is one suggestion, I would say that I'm not able to see your hand gestures. So probably it's because of your camera setting, I think. I think if you could adjust your camera, that would be great in the future.
Okay, so you switched to something different. We were talking about the structure, and now you're talking about hand gestures. Okay, so and this is a very, very difficult thing to do. What's one specific thing you observed? What's your reaction to the thing you observed? And then what's your suggestion? and I found it difficult to see your hand gestures. And as a result, I felt that I could only see the emphasis that you had in your face. And I felt like I was missing something. So I recommend that you move your camera so that it's easier to see your hand gestures in the future. That would be the observation, reaction, recommendation. Okay? 3-step process. Let me
I understand that.
Okay, so let me continue here. The final part of the evaluation speech structure is the closing. Now, some of us have heard the proverbial sandwich method of closing, where you say something good, and then you say something wasn't good, and then you say something is good again. Well, that's actually a mixed message. So what I like to do, instead of saying that piece at the end of something good again, I think that's an appropriate time to offer encouragement. Now, I do something that some people would say is cliche, and when I hear a speech, I usually say something like, "I look forward to hearing your speech again," or "hearing you speak another time." You know, that sounds cliche, but the truth is, I really do want to hear them speak again, because I want to see if anything that I suggested was helpful to them and it made a difference. And finally, there's the Toastmaster ritual, which in this case just consists of closing by saying something like, "Mr. General Evaluator," "Madam General Evaluator." And this is especially important if you happen to be in a contest for evaluation, because that's the signal that the timing has stopped. So that's the Toastmaster ritual that says, "Okay, I'm done now. Thank you very much," without saying thank you very much. So let's take a look. Let's go back and summarize what that is. Toastmaster ritual: connect to the speaker, 1 to 3 effective behaviors using the ORS model, perhaps 1 to 3 ineffective behaviors, encouragement, and the Toastmaster ritual. So at this point,
Dan,
yes,
we did have one more hand. Can you please entertain one more comment?
absolutely.
Pramila?
Good morning, Dan. I don't have actually any evaluation, but I would just summarize way you suggested the model, how, why, how, and what. That is where I think is very important. That gears us to be, when we go to evaluate something, we have to be ready.
Absolutely. And if you think about it, the what is what you observed, the why is your reaction, and the how is the recommendation. So all of those 3 things are important to communicate to the speaker, and you communicate them through that ORS model. What it is you observed, why what your observation was had an impact on you, your reaction, and what to do to either continue doing it and continue to be effective, or what to change in order to be more effective.
Yes.
So what I'd like to do at this time is to have our test speaker. My apologies. I'm expecting a call today, but that was not it. What we'd like to do is to have our test speaker and then have 2 evaluators give feedback, hopefully using this model. So, and in the meantime, what we're going to do is I'm going to facilitate and get some feedback from you about what you observed for the speaker. So speaker, are you ready? I'm going to give you an introduction. Let me get out of my here.
And please give the timing so the timer can
Yes,
give the
I'm ready.
time.
Is the speech a 5 to 7 minute long speech, or is it something besides that, Christy?
5 to 7 minutes, yes.
5 to 7, okay? So 5, 6, and 7, green, yellow, and red, correct?
Mm-hmm.
That is correct.
Great, okay. So, you know, I'm really looking forward to this next speaker because like many people, I have been working from home. I'm sitting in my basement and have been since March. And in fact, I haven't had a haircut since March. So I'm really looking forward to hearing this speaker. Our speaker is going to be doing a Pathways program, innovative planning, researching, and presenting. Our speaker is Christy Hugh. She's an experienced tax analyst who would like to share some possible tax consequences on our daily life in general after people started to work from home more frequently during the pandemic. Title of her speech is The Tax Impact of Working from Home. Please help me welcome Christy Hugh.
Thank you, Stan. Dear guests and fellow Toastmasters, as the COVID-19 continues to spread across the country, many of us are finding working from home becomes a new normal of life. Some big companies have extended work from home until next summer, or even as a permanent option for employees. Working from home may impact companies and employees' tax in many ways. I would like to talk about two possible consequences on your individual income tax. Firstly, you may be eligible for home office deduction on your tax return. To determine your eligibility, we need to figure out whether you're an employee or an independent contractor. If you receive a W-2 from your company and the W-2 will be reported to IRS, you probably are an employee. If you receive your compensation on Form 1099 based on the work you perform, you're an independent contractor. Why does that matter? As a result of the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, TCJA, for the tax years 2018 through 2025, you cannot claim the home office deduction if you're an employee. However, under TCJA, if you're self-employed or an independent contractor, you can continue to deduct qualifying home office expense on your Form 8828, 8829, which is filed along with your Schedule C on your Form 1040. To qualify for the home office deduction, the part of a home attributable to business must be exclusively and regularly for a trade of business. For example, I have my workstation set up in my den solely used for my work. On my desk, there are my work laptop, 2 monitors, keyboard, some tax reference books, notepads, and pens. I can work there as efficiently as I work in the office, and I can claim that space as my home office. What if I work on my dining table in the dining area? I cannot claim that space as my home office because dining area is not exclusively used for my work, thus not tax deductible. So how do you calculate the home office deduction? If your home office is 200 square feet and your home is 2,000 square feet, 10% of your home-related expenses, such as homeowner's insurance, property tax, mortgage interest, and some utilities can be deducted on your tax return. While home office deduction is a bit confusing, another consequence, possible tax consequence, is that you may face multiple state tax filing complications. For example, if you live in south of Indiana and commute daily to work in Louisville, Kentucky, you will likely have to file 2 state returns, a resident tax return in Indiana and a non-resident tax return in Kentucky. If you work in Kentucky all year, your tax should be relatively easy. only Kentucky withhold your state income tax. And when you file Indiana tax return, you get a credit for the tax paid to Kentucky. But what if because of pandemic, you work in Kentucky through March, then work from home in Indiana through June, and back to work in Kentucky again in July? The tax will be complicated. Indiana may need to withhold state income tax based on the time you work from home during the year. Also, to make this tax credit works, you have to file your tax return in the correct order. You need to first file tax to the state where you work and then claim the credit on your resident tax return. If you mix up the order, you may end up missing out credits and get stuck paying additional state tax. Moreover, your state tax will get more complicated when states have different tax returns, different tax rates and residency rules. There is currently no national standard on withholding and filing state tax return for employees who work and live in multiple states. During pandemic, the American Institute of AICPA developed recommendations that will allow business to continue to withhold state income tax based on employer's location instead of employees' work from home location. In other words, under these recommendations, your tax and withholding will not change at all. So far, 13 states, including Illinois and Indiana, have issued guidance that follows the AICPA suggestion on withholding. If you work from home in Indiana for your employer in Illinois, you should be protected from paying double tax. In summary, our life and tax have been greatly impacted by working from home during pandemic. The changing tax law could be overwhelming, even for tax professionals. We are all learning new stuff every tax season. My advice is you can avoid any surprise on your tax return by keeping good track of your receipts and tax documents and talking to a CPA if you have any questions and concerns. I hope you stay safe and take full advantage of your tax benefit while working from home. Thank you.
Thank you, Christy. That was wonderful. Now, Calvin, I'm going to ask you to do some work for me. We have 2 evaluators, and I'd like you to put them in a separate room and give them time to prepare their evaluations while the rest of us are going to talk about Christy's presentation and specific things that we observed and examples of what we might recommend. So we have 2 evaluators. We have Rupa and we have Josna. Could you please move off to the a separate room? Can you have? Do you know how to do that, Calvin?
Yes, GP, can you move them?
I can. Do I move both of them?
Yes, you
to
can
the
move them
waiting
to the
room?
same room. That's fine.
Okay, I will put you both in the waiting room.
And we're going to give you about 7 minutes to work on this.
There we go.
Okay, they're moved.
Okay, great. Madam Timer, please give us 7 minutes. Give us a 5, 6, and 7, because I'm going to facilitate the rest of the people who are in the group, and we're going to talk about what we might expect to hear in the feedback from our evaluators. So either by simply raising your hand, I'd like to hear some of the observations that you had for Christy's speech. Go ahead, Pramila.
Thank you. Christy, it was a very good presentation. It's very hard virtually to stand and give a presentation. However, I could see that your body was moving, but you were in one place. I would,
Okay, hold on just a minute. What I'm looking for now is just what did you observe?
she was in one place, but her body was just swinging. There was a swing in her
Like
body.
this, a little bit?
Like this, yeah.
Okay, moving back and forth. Great. What
But
else do we observe?
there was only one hand was going up. She was trying to have the hand gestures, but it was only one hand was kind of moving here and there.
Great. So single-handed gestures instead of two-handed gestures.
Gestures.
Excellent. Does someone else have some observations? Nicely done. Observations.
Yes, Christy. I observed that you seemed very comfortable giving the speech.
That's all I'm looking for is the observation. Don't worry about the reaction. Don't worry about the suggestion at this point. So she
Okay.
appeared comfortable. Great. What other observations do you have? I have GP Priya.
Yep. So I noticed how Christy gave some good examples of how she's set up like a home office and not just having the like a tax form numbers, but she also elaborated with examples.
Great.
in her
Okay.
speech.
So she had examples and included the tax forms numbers. And Sonia.
I observed that Christy was very knowledgeable about the material in giving specifics and details.
Okay. So she gave specifics and details and gave you the impression that she was knowledgeable. Great. Other things you observed. Let me ask you, did you find the structure easy to follow? I'm seeing some head nods, yes? Okay, go ahead. Boy, I'm not gonna get this. Is it Nagaramish?
Correct. Yeah. So yeah, the structure is clear, but I would still would like to see connection between that state and go ahead and finish the state. I think she started at the federal first, federal level, and then state level, and then working in multiple states. So the connection was good at one point, and I would see more connection together from beginning to
Okay.
end.
So in general, the structure was good, but there were places where you were lost. Is that what I'm hearing?
Correct.
Okay, good. What else? What else did you observe? Christy, either everybody's afraid to say something or you gave a really well done speech and people are trying to figure out what it is they can give you feedback on.
Sharon?
Okay, Sharon, go ahead, Sharon.
General evaluator, and specifically Christy, what I observed is during the course of your presentation, you felt very relaxed and very knowledgeable about your topic. And what that did for me is made me write notes down to let me contact you in the future to get more details on how I can take advantage of tax implications for my home office.
Okay, so now you went into the observation and the reaction. Let's go back. So for some of the things that we had were the observation. Pramila, go back to your observation and then tell me what your reaction was based on that observation.
Thank you, Stan. My reaction was to tell her, like, you mean what I should react and
No,
give.
not your recommendation. So that's your suggestion, your reaction, your emotional reaction to what you observed. So tell me again what you observed.
Okay, I observed that she was comfortable, but her body was a little bit in a swing.
Okay, so what was your reaction to her body moving back and forth?
It was a little bit of distracting.
Okay, good. So I was distracted by your body moving back and forth. Now let's go to the recommendation. What would you recommend that she do not to move her body back and forth?
I would recommend her to just keep in one posture. No doubt it's very hard to give a speech while you are standing virtually, but I would tell you to just be in a very stiff position, like fixed position. If you have to move, you can move the whole body. You can move left and right, but not only the swing.
Okay, so and this is the place where we have challenges is what is it we're going to specifically recommend? And sometimes we feel we don't have a good recommendation repertoire, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. Okay. Nagaramish, would you go back and tell us about what yours again and your observation, then your reaction, and then your recommendation?
So my observation was the continuity of that various state level, and then she was talking about multiple states.
Okay.
So my response, my reaction to that was, I was trying to more focus and more attentive and connecting points myself from the what she said at the beginning, what she's going to say, with extra effort from my end to connect those junctions back.
Okay, so let me summarize that. Because she went back and forth between state and national and multi-state, you felt confused and unable to follow her, is that correct?
I don't say confused, but I'm trying to connect continuity.
Okay, so you felt there was a lack of continuity?
Yeah.
Good. And your recommendation would be?
So if you break it up, okay, if you are work from home in the particular state, and then explain that, and then give a break. Okay, now next condition, if the person is working in multiple states, how that is going to be. So each pause, if you give that, so everybody can follow easily. That's my recommendation.
I got it, Ansonia. I was just wanting to finish that one comment. Okay, so now we've seen some examples of how we can talk about what we observed, what we our reaction to that, and our recommendation. Okay, so would whoever is managing the meeting ask one of our evaluators to come through? I believe Rupa is first.
Sure, I'll let Rupa in. Rupa's here.
Good, Rupa. Now, we know this is difficult. You only had 7 minutes to prepare. So we're not expecting it to be super wonderful or anything like that, but we're going to see how well you did at following the process. So please help me welcome Rupa. I practiced this so much and now I'm failing on it. Rupa Chudamadi. Okay.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Stan, especially Christy who. Christy, I really, really liked your speech. From a couple of perspectives, you've chosen such a pertinent and a relevant topic, and I was listening to every word of it so carefully. I really liked the tone that you had, and your voice was so audible. And throughout the speech, you maintained the tempo and the pace. And I could tell that you really enjoyed doing your work, and you were able to speak about it very confidently and articulately. Like Stan said, what is in it for me? I think this is a speech that's relevant to everybody, and I'm sure everybody was paying full attention. If there are a few suggestions that I could give. You had started out explaining the process very well about the tax implications for an employee versus somebody who is an independent contractor. You talked about the W-2 versus the 1099. And then you went on to talk about the differences when there is double taxation and so on. Somehow I was still waiting for the question, during the pandemic, can employees claim, the home office benefit that you were talking about? So my suggestion would be to, if you take like just the two parts, right? The home office, the employee versus the independent contractor, stick to it for some time and then do the transition to the other piece. In terms of lighting, since we are in a virtual world, and for the next 6 months, 7 months, we don't know, we would still be using this Zoom and virtual calls. I have a couple of suggestions from a technology perspective. When you started out, I could hear a very strong echo. I don't know if it was from overall the meeting end or your end, but testing before you speak, that could have helped. And the other thing was the lighting. Again, I couldn't see you so very well. I think you're sitting by the window, so the lighting was a bit off. Those would be the couple of suggestions from a technology and a Zoom perspective. Third suggestion would be the ending. In the conclusion, I would have liked you to reiterate the points, and also some type of a call to action to say, hey, do you guys know you can go work on it today and claim your home office benefit or something like that? If the speech was very informative, but to add a couple of things like that, that would have made it much more powerful. But thank you so much. Very informative and educational.
And Mr. Toastmaster or Mr. Evaluator, to conclude, because we didn't know you were done until you say that.
Okay. Yes. Yeah.
Now, yeah. I'm going to give you a little bit of feedback on this before we hear the next one. You spent a lot of time being nice to the speaker rather than getting into the recommendations and reactions. And so if you had taken that first 45 seconds and instead of trying to say, oh, it was wonderful, I really appreciated blah, 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 going into, here are the things I observed, here's what I observed, here's my recommendation, here's my reaction, and here's my suggestion, you'd had more time to dig into that instead of worrying about helping her ego. And this is one thing that we're all very cautious of in Toastmasters. We don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. Well, you know what? We need to, the best way not to hurt their feelings is to give them effective feedback.
Okay.
We're too cautious and too afraid that we're going to hurt somebody's feelings. Okay? Could I have our next evaluator come in, please? Oh, good. So our next evaluator is Josna Aquila, sorry. It's going to be a standard 3-minute evaluation, and you'll see the red at 2, the yellow, or the green at 2, the yellow at 2.5, and the red at 3. Okay? So please take it away.
You're on mute, Josna.
You're on mute.
We can't hear you, Josna.
Mr. Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, and honorable guests. Christy, I am new to tax laws, and I find myself struggling with these tax laws. So when I hear you start speaking about taxes, and I immediately got hooked to what you're speaking to. And especially right now, I'm trying to set up a home office. I have a back pain, and I'm trying to find a ergonomic equipment that suits my posture and everything. So it is very expensive. So I was really hearing to see how I can probably take advantage of filing some of that and take advantage of some tax deductions. Yeah, that information is the information you have provided throughout the speech is very good, and I've been engaged because of that reason. Now I know I can claim some of that and probably get some tax deductions. Now, one thing I've noticed is initially in your speech, you have indicated that there is a difference on what we can claim depending on whether we are a self-employed or an employee for a company. I did not get the clarity on what are the differences. The reason for that, I think, is it's a short speech and you are trying to provide so much information, and you may have to, because of that, I think you had to rush. You are trying to get all the information in, and you didn't have time to repeat some of what you said or summarize what you have said. So I wanted to hear that one more time. So am I qualified because I'm an employee? I'm not a self-employed. So I wanted to see, am I qualified to claim my home office? And if I am, what can I do? I know you also mentioned about if you have a 2,000 square feet house, you can claim as long as you're using 200 square feet as your home office, you can claim. I wanted to hear more about that, but you quickly moved on to working in different states and so forth. So I think one suggestion I have is probably next time, because it's only 5 to 7 minute speech, try to pick one of the tax laws and then go deep into it, elaborate on that a bit more. In the process, what also could happen is you'll have time to give more pauses. I felt like you didn't have time to allow any of that. You were rushing because you have a short time and you wanted to have a lot of information as part of your speech. So I would say if you stick to one topic and if you go deep on that topic, because that's where you're giving your information and the audience are now learning, and then they're able to process that, and it would allow you to go into that mode of giving pauses along your speech. I'm quickly looking at my notes if there is anything else that I wanted to cover. Pretty much, I would say, other than that, I really liked your speech because, like I said, I'm pretty dumb when it comes to tax laws. So I'm sure I'm just doing the plain vanilla filing. So I wanted to hear more about it. Now I know who to go to with all my tax questions next time. Back to you, Mr. Toastmaster.
I don't know if you saw the timer, but we started to get a flashing red, which meant that you were well over 3 minutes and 30 seconds. And therefore, the issue that you need to be working on more than anything else is being succinct. You had a really wonderful starting point where you connected with the speaker, but then you kept going and going and going and connecting with the speaker rather than going into the feedback piece, the feedback portion. And so your issue is going to be how to get all your concepts together into a succinct 3-minute piece of feedback. And that is a challenge, but this is the way to do it, is to say, okay, what's point 1? What's point 2? What's point 3? And it literally becomes that easy, and you don't have to go long into each explanation. So the challenge, obviously, that we all have in this is to give feedback and have a repertoire of what our feedback is going to be. So let me give you some examples of how you can be better prepared. You can all see my screen now? Do you see this? Which screen do you see? Do you see creative and delivering effective evaluations, or do you see keys to preparation?
Key preparations.
You see keys to preparation?
Yes.
Great, perfect. Okay, so to build a repertoire, one of the things that you want to do is look for resources that can help you. There are a number of them that are, and they're building, excuse me, they are building on the TI website. Pathways videos are helpful to look at. And quite frankly, I think that the old CC manual is a very useful thing. Now, you might have difficulty finding the CC manual since Toastmasters is no longer producing them. However, I can guarantee you if you go on the internet and look up Competent Communicator Manual, somebody has made PDFs of it, and you can use that as a starting point. The other thing you can do is do suggestions from other evaluations that you hear. We don't all know everything, and every time you hear a good suggestion, that becomes an idea that you should add to your repertoire. I think it's possible to do a lot of independent research. There are lots and lots of articles and books about how to give feedback. These days, podcasts are very popular, and YouTube videos are also very available. But don't assume that all sources have equal value. Some people give really bad feedback, and it doesn't help you to become better at it. Here are some examples of some things that I've found particularly effective. This pin drop principle is one that's relatively new. It's from somebody who was an actor and gives information about how to apply acting things into presentations. The one about the magic of speech evaluation is really nice because it gives you specific TED Talks to look at and then gives you feedback, give you an example of the kind of feedback that someone might give to the person making the TED Talk. There's, of course, lots and lots of books, as I made reference to. This is just some of the stuff that I found in doing a quick search on Amazon. By the way, there's one in here I'll point out. It's What Mark Twain Learned Me About Public Speaking by our own Connor Caneen, who's out in Naperville. One of the things that's a particularly effective to do is to keep a Toastmaster notebook. After you've looked at the resources and done your research, keep track of everything. We had someone here in 2013 that was the International Speech Contest winner, the winner nation of the Worldwide Championship. And what he did is every time he went to a meeting, he took notes not only on the feedback that he got, but on the feedback that everyone else was given, so that over time he picked up really good tips on how to get more effective. So having a Toastmaster notebook is a good thing to do. I think to become a better observer, it's important to take notes during the speech. One of the things that I noticed, I was watching the two people that were the evaluators, and what I should have seen is a head down as they were taking notes. What I saw is that they were watching the speaker, which is a logical thing to do. But if you want to give specific feedback, it's important to take effective notes. And you can also watch the audience as you're taking notes. it's important also to practice giving evaluations. The more the evaluations you give, the better you are going to get at it. And there are lots of places to practice. If you don't have Toastmaster clubs to go to, watch a YouTube video of a speech and then practice what you might say to that person if you had a 3-minute evaluation. If you're not having enough time to meet at clubs, there are plenty of other clubs who really want to have visitors, especially during this COVID-19 era, where a lot of membership is down. They'd love to have a visitor and somebody who's an experienced Toastmaster to be an evaluator. And of course, there's the evaluation contest. That's the way that you can get really, really skilled at this. I want to talk about, just real quickly, let me check on one thing, Calvin. I have me at just a little bit, I got about 10 more minutes according to my watch. Is that about right?
Yes, Stan, that is correct.
Okay, great. Excuse me. So here are some examples of low value or no value evaluations. One of them is the repeat and report example. So here, I really liked your speech about going to France. You talked about going to the Louvre and all the different artwork that you saw. You had lunch on the Champs-Élysées. You made sure to go up to the Eiffel Tower. You know what? I don't need the evaluator to repeat my speech, and neither did the other members of the club. They were there. They heard it. So don't repeat and report what you heard. We talked earlier about sandwich evaluations. I actually have some research that shows that a sandwich evaluation, especially if you're giving a sandwich evaluation to an employee, is a confusing mixed message. And we talked about the difference in, instead of having just what was effective and what was ineffective, then go back to what was effective, using that idea of giving encouragement. You know, I really appreciated your speech about scuba diving. I personally am a scuba diver, and I saw that when you talked about this, you did some things that were wrong. You said that you don't relate and then debate what the individual said. It's not your job to correct them or to argue with them about the content of their speech. We've all heard whitewash evaluations where the individual was either so impressed that they couldn't think of anything to tell you to improve, which really doesn't help at all. Even if you can't think of something to make different, what did you observe that you thought was particularly effective? That's a critically important thing to know too. So even if you can't find, even if you thought the speaker was so effective that you can't think of anything to suggest to change in behavior, then make sure you know what behaviors you thought were effective so that you can tell them to do this. Doom and gloom. You know, that was the worst speech I ever heard. I will never get back the 7 minutes that you just spent of my life. Please don't do that to somebody. We're trying to encourage, not discourage. And rating systems, and it says here, shame on you, TI. The one thing I really have a problem with in relation to the TI evaluation forms is that they're 1 to 5 scales. So if I give you a 3 and somebody else gives you a 3, is it the same measurement? So numerical scales are not very helpful. Unfortunately, because of the program that we're in, some of the basics have been overlooked, and it's difficult to, you know, they've given you at least some idea in the evaluation form. Now, the other thing I want to say about that is the evaluation form should not necessarily be how you give the evaluation speech. You don't want to just say, well, I gave you a 3 on your vocal variety, and I gave you a 4 on your organization. That doesn't help. So please, please, please avoid these low value evaluations. You can also, so there's some things that I've learned over the course of delivering this a number of times. You can use the ORS method in the general evaluator role. That's another place to practice. Don't worry about it not being perfect. Toastmasters is a place where we're here to make mistakes and to learn from those mistakes. So if it's not perfect, that's okay. Try it again the next time. Remember sometimes that not everybody wants coaching. And if you have a member of your club or you detect that somebody really just wants to have a pat on the back, great. Just give them that kind of coaching. There's a number of things you can do to experiment. So what we did was group feedback, where we facilitated some feedback. Some people call that round robin. To me, round robin is where everybody gets a chance to speak. In a facilitation, not everybody does. I'm a member of a club called Windy City Professional Speakers, and all of our clubs have, all of our speeches have extended feedback, not just from one person, but from a number of people who want to give feedback. Sometimes we're in clubs where there's a challenge getting people to volunteer for speaking. That's not a problem. Have more than one evaluator evaluate the same speech. That gives us more practice in giving feedback, and it takes up more time on the agenda.
That's
Which
brilliant.
also, say again?
That's brilliant. I like that.
Thank you. Another thing you can do is to assign a specific skill to an evaluator and assign a different skill to a different evaluator. So for example, if the speaker wants to work on gestures, make sure that somebody specifically looks at gestures, whereas somebody else might look at organization. And then finally, create a club log of suggestions. If people aren't keeping their own recommendations, you can keep a club log of suggestions, and that helps new members learn what kinds of things they can do to give feedback. So the trick on all of this is just do it. The only way to learn to get better at evaluations is to just keep working on getting better at evaluations. So I know I haven't left a lot of time for questions, but at this point, if anyone would like to ask some specific things, I would be happy to entertain those questions. Nagaramish.
Thank you so much for your time today explaining in detail about this evaluations and more consciously and more systematically by focusing three areas you mentioned that. Just one question I would like to ask is, especially when you're giving the presentation and you need to focus on the audience, and at the same time you also need to focus on the slides as well. So how do you maintain the balance, sometimes, and doing that both simultaneously?
You're talking about as a speaker or as an evaluator?
As a speaker.
Okay. So we didn't talk about what we're talking about for speaking skills, but it's a matter of simply practicing more than anything else. And the wonderful thing about Zoom is that Zoom allows you to record yourself. So if you like, what you can do ahead of time is just get onto a Zoom call with yourself, practice your speech, deliver it, see what you're doing, and then you can pay more attention to watching the audience rather than worrying about the slides or the other pieces. Okay?
Thank you.
Other questions?
When are you going to do this again? Did you record this one?
I believe that this was recorded. Is that right for Calvin?
Hot diggity.
Yes.
That is correct.
I want to watch it again.
Okay, good. I'd be happy to do that. I thank you for asking about doing it again. A club in Park Ridge has asked me to do this. I haven't set a date for that yet. And there's a club up in the northern suburbs that's asked me to do this before the end of the year. It's a club that happens to have a lot of people who are using English as a second language, and they happen to be Chinese for the most part. So that'll be an interesting experience because there are lots of cultural issues with giving feedback to Asian cultures, as I'm sure those of you who are from Asian cultures recognize.
Yeah, how do I get on the guest list for those?
I will let Calvin know about the details and Calvin can communicate them. But I think also we're going to try to make sure that they're on the District 30 calendar.
Very cool.
Other questions?
Stan, not a question, but a observation or a notable point. I'm very glad that you mentioned that with each evaluation, there's always something to be given on the positive, on the negative as well.
Don't use positive and negative. Effective and ineffective.
Effective and ineffective.
Yes.
And even if you think you have nothing, you can always refer back to ORS, observation, reaction, and suggestion, and find something to give towards that evaluation. So that's a very good point.
You know, one of the ways that I recruit for the Windy City Professional Speakers Club is I look for people who have a reason to speak outside of Toastmasters, and I ask them this question. Have you gotten more than one evaluation where someone said, that was such a good speech, I can't think of anything else to give, anything to tell you? And if that's the kind of feedback you're getting, it's not helping you learn. I think that's the most important thing we can do as Toastmaster members is learn how to be better at giving feedback, because feedback is what helps people grow. You know, there's an analogy that I use. A knife does not get sharper by cutting through butter. A knife gets sharper by being used on a whetstone. And a whetstone provides resistance that sharpens the blade. And I think that those of us who are in this organization need to get better at helping each other sharpen our blades by not being so buttery in the feedback that we give.
Ouch.
SK, go ahead.
Stan, thanks for the time to come here and help us out in evaluation. Being with this club for like 9 months, most of us are like motivational evaluators. So we try to help our fellow speakers to come and speak again and again. So my question here is, whatever Rupa evaluated and Josna evaluated, if you see, we always start with a positive note, right? Whatever points that we have noted, we start with a positive note, and then slowly we go to the observations, like what can be improved. And that's what Rupa has done. And you corrected her, telling that it's been repeated, so she can come to that point. So my question to you is, like, if I'm a evaluator, if I have noted down like 13 points, 10 points are really good, like the speaker has done so well. And there are like 3 points, 3 observations, which she can correct her next speech. What I have to put first? The 3 things that she didn't do well, that I have to tell?
Okay, so let me start here. First of all, you need, as you look at all the things that you observed, pick the things that you feel are going to have the greatest impact on making a difference in the next speech. So if there's 10 things that you observe that you can give feedback on, what are the 2 or 3 things that are the most critical in improving those skills? Okay? I would, like I said, my structure is, here are the 3 things that I thought you were effective, where you were effective, and my recommendations for being more effective or continuing to be effective. And then here are 3 things where I felt you were less effective, and my recommendations for being, how to change those. So first item, observation, reaction, suggestion. Second item, observation, reaction, suggestion. Third item, observation, suggestion, observation, reaction, suggestion. Now let's look at the things that I want to, I thought were ineffective. First item, observation, reaction, suggestion. And if you follow that pattern, you'll find that, number one, you'll get through the speech, you'll get through the evaluation very quickly, and it'll be very orderly. It'll make sense to the person you're giving feedback to. Did that answer your question?
Yes.
Great. I believe we are at our time. Is that correct, Calvin?
Madam Timer?
Well, I'm worried about your agenda time. You said you leave it, you're finished at 11. I don't know
Right.
what other business you have after this.
Right, I've been chatting with the timer, so I'll let her say the time.
Yes.
Yes, we're at time.
10:42. We're at 10:42.
Thank you. Yes, Dan, we're at the end.
Okay, great. Well, I appreciate your listening to me this morning, and I hope that you found that there was some things that you have that will be of value. I do strongly recommend, since it was recorded, to go back and watch it again. There was an awful lot of information that came out in 90 minutes. And I know that it takes more than one listen to really get it, to really absorb all the stuff that we've talked about today. So thank you so much for inviting me today. Mr. Toastmaster.
Thank you, Stan.